Welcome to the Travel Like a Boss podcast, where we interview location-independent entrepreneurs that travel the world like a boss by being their own boss. Here's your host, Johnny FD.
Hey guys, it's Johnny, and welcome to episode 232 of the Travel Like a Boss podcast. I am in Tbilisi, Georgia, with Brent and Michael. Welcome to the show.
Hey Johnny, nice to be here.
Very nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited because in 232 episodes, we've only had on a few couples. There's not that many digital nomad couples.
And I think we know them all.
Yeah. And you're our first gay couple. So thank you for representing.
Score for us.
We were a little surprised when we set out on the digital nomad journey. We thought there would be more LGBT folks than there are. I mean, there are more. The longer we do this, the more we run into people. But we're a little surprised by that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a few gay friends. I've met a few lesbian, digital nomad travelers as well. But it's not, I mean, I grew up in San Francisco, so maybe I'm a bit biased. But it's definitely not a big part, not a big percentage.
We've noticed the same thing, and we've really been surprised by it. And we've tried to figure out exactly why it is. I don't know that we've quite come to any conclusions about that.
Although I think we want to be sort of emissaries to say to people, look, you can do this. We haven't experienced any discrimination from digital nomads, at least on that issue. And it doesn't feel like, I mean, if you are careful as you travel the world, as I'm sure you know, I mean, there are things everybody needs to be aware of. And we always do research countries in terms of their attitudes about LGBT folks before we go anywhere. But we haven't experienced anything. The world is a lot less scary than you might think for a gay couple, even sort of like a relatively out gay couple.
Well, and to the contrary, we've actually been surprised that the fact that we're a gay couple is almost usually the least notable thing about us to our fellow digital nomads. It almost never comes up. People don't have a lot of questions. Digital nomads are just such a diverse, interesting, open group of people that it's like, yeah, you're gay, you've got brown hair, so what?
Yeah, well, I don't think either of you have brown hair.
That's cold, Johnny.
Yeah. One of us has no hair.
Yeah, but actually that's another unique kind of a point of you guys. You're a bit older.
Definitely. I think we've run into a few other digital nomads our age. We're in our 50s, and it's definitely a younger group.
Honestly, when we first set out, I was thinking that digital nomading would be like everything else I've done in my life, where people divide into different tables, like the lunch in high school. There's the cool kids table and the geek table and all of that. And I have been pleasantly surprised that really isn't the case among digital nomads. And some of our friends that we feel the closest to are sort of the least like us superficially. They're not our age, and that's great. I think that's one of the strengths about it.
I think there's only one place I've been to out of all my nomading where it feels very cliquey, almost like high school again.
Ooh, where?
Canggu, Bali.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I really didn't like it there.
I've not heard a lot of good things about Canggu. We have a couple friends who've been there, and everything they've said about us made us not want to go. Going back to the emissary thing, along with the LGBT thing, we want to communicate to people our age that this is something they should totally consider. They should get out in the world and do this. In fact, a lot of times they've got more financial resources. They've got a job where they're more able to say to their boss, I'd like to be location independent.
Kids are out of the house. If they had them, they're no longer at home.
Yeah, and how did you two get started?
So we had talked about this for a long time. My father's elderly, and we wanted to wait until sort of things were settled. He was in assisted living and all of that. We talked about it for a long time, and we always sort of thought of it as something we would do eventually. Then Donald Trump was elected, and we sort of looked at each other and thought, this is a good time to leave the United States, since it seems like civilization is collapsing. And so that was sort of the impetus. But sometimes I wonder if that hadn't happened, would we have sat on our butts forever? Would we ever? Because, we owned a house and we had a strong social network in Seattle. And it took some effort to overcome the inertia. We had a settled life. Fortunately, we both already had remote jobs. We're both writers. I'm a screenwriter and a novelist, and Michael is a novelist. So that part was easy. But the rest of it, we were sort of entrenched. And so it took sort of something to slap us across the face. I'm not saying that the election of Donald Trump was in any way a good thing, because it wasn't. But for us personally, it was a good reason to leave the country.
Well, ironically for me, it was almost bringing my life full circle, because in my 20s, after I graduated from college, I took off and I lived in Australia and New Zealand for 2 years and almost kept doing that. I almost went to Japan to teach English as a second language, but finally decided, no, I'm going to come back and try and make it as a writer. So stepping back into this, while some of the technology has changed and the terminology has changed, it's no longer backpackers and hostels, it's digital nomads and co-working and co-living. Part of it feels very familiar and very much like coming home for me.
That's nice. Actually, one funny thing about the digital nomad movement is we really like to think that we are completely different. We're pioneers. We're the first to travel and live abroad and work abroad. I'm sure all the expats, especially the older ones, or the people that backpacked 50 years ago, they're like, you guys have a smartphone now and a laptop, hilarious. But really you're doing the same thing as us.
It's hilarious. It's so true. It's funny. I feel like I'm different from maybe most digital nomads and from Michael in another way, in that I'm not a particularly adventurous person. I never saw myself as a risk taker. I still don't like to take big risks. I'm somewhat cautious in life. And I feel like I can be an emissary to the people who maybe think, oh, that's too much for me. Because my experience these last 2 years has been that the world is so not a scary place. And because of these changes in technology that we're talking about, it is easier to do than it's ever been. And there's really nothing to be afraid of. I mean, when I confronted the fears I had, Michael had been doing this. He had done this before, as he said. And I did think when we set out 2 years ago, this is sort of subtext to the conversation. What if one of us likes it? And by that, I mean, what if Michael liked it and I didn't? What do we do then? We're a couple and we're committed. And it turns out he really, really, really liked it right away. But fortunately, I did too. And I was surprised myself because it is somewhat different than how I see myself. But then I think the bigger answer is the world just isn't the scary place that I thought it was. This is so much easier than I thought it was.
So was it more that it wasn't as scary as you thought it was, or did you end up liking certain aspects of it? Like what was it that just kind of sold you on this lifestyle?
Gosh, so much of it. I mean, I feel like we really can be ambassadors, because just the whole idea, when the concept is presented to you, everything you own, you carry with you. So if you buy something new, you have to get rid of something old. And on one hand, you think, I don't want to get rid of things. I like my things. But once you start doing it, it is just so liberating that everything is intentional in your life. And when everything you buy to eat is intentional. And so everything becomes a conscious choice. And for me, I found that a revelation. It's just wonderful. And life, I mean, so many of our friends back in Seattle, they say, gosh, that's really exciting what you're doing. We love what you're doing. I could never do that. It sounds too stressful. And I want to say the reality is our life is so much less stressful now than it was when we lived in Seattle, because, A, it's a hectic, crazy, congested city, and B, it's an incredibly expensive city. So we had to work our asses off in order to pay for our lifestyle. Now, I just did our budget for an article on our blog, and we're spending about half of what we spent in Seattle. And I don't feel like we're depriving ourselves. That's 2 months of this year is going to be spent on a cruise ship. We spent time in Switzerland and in Italy. And so we're spending time in expensive countries, not just cheaper countries. And we're traveling the world, meeting amazing people, having fantastic experiences for half what we were spending. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it still astounds me.
No, I mean, a lot of listeners haven't made the move yet. They're literally living back home, maybe in Seattle, maybe with a cushy job.
Leave now, get up and go.
And the funny thing is, it's almost bad when people do start going, because they'll binge listen when they're at their office back home. And as soon as they start traveling, they'll listen for some tips. But then after a while, they're like, all right, well, I already know what I'm doing. So they won't listen again until they're back home on vacation or something. So sometimes I have people saying like, oh yeah, I listened to the first 180 episodes, I moved to Chiang Mai, and then I haven't listened to any of the new ones yet. But it's on my backlog for my next flight.
That's funny. The other thing about people back home and what they don't understand about this lifestyle is a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to give up my things and I want my own space. Because we talk about co-living and how you have a smaller space. You've got your bedroom. Sometimes you share a bathroom, you share a kitchen. And the thing I always try and drive home to people is, yes, you're giving up a little of that personal space, but you're gaining the whole world. I mean, you get to go live in Switzerland and have the Swiss Alps be your backyard instead of just what you know in Seattle. And usually in co-living, people are off doing so many different things that you find plenty of that time to have your own space.
Yes, but as the more neurotic of the two of us, it is possible also to have that personal space, and you just make that a priority. I prefer an ensuite apartment. I want a bedroom with a bathroom attached. And I know what I like now, and so we make a point to do that. And, we spend maybe a third of our time in co-living, which is great. We get to know people, we enjoy their company, we're part of their lives, we get to know each other. But then we usually make a point maybe to have an apartment where it's just us. Or, and then we have that personal time where we sort of recharge, we're sort of introverts. And so what is important to you, you just make it a priority. And it's really not that hard because these options exist.
Yeah, especially now with Airbnb, because this would have been much harder even definitely 10 years ago.
What wouldn't have been harder 5 or 10 years ago or before the advent of the iPhone? I mean, it's so amazing that I can go on and book all of our reservations, take care of the airline reservations, figure out where the train is going, contact the Airbnb host to say that we're coming later, all from the one device. I mean, the iPhone has completely changed things. And I sort of want to go back to something you're talking before about the difference between backpackers and digital nomads, since I have done both. And to me, it feels like, yes, they did things that we're doing the same things of, but I do feel like digital nomads are different in the sense that some of us tend to go a little bit slower than backpackers did, anywhere from 1 to 3 months. And I feel like you get a much better sense of a place than I ever did as a backpacker. Backpacker usually wasn't there longer than a week before I was off going somewhere else. And ironically, I'm reading Nomadic Matt's memoir right now, and he's talking about in a hostile situation, you get to know somebody very quickly, but then you go your own way, and then you might not ever see them again. One of the things we've discovered in our second year of being digital nomads is that you actually develop a sense of community with other digital nomads, both because of social media, you can stay in touch with them, and B, there are digital nomad hubs, so you tend to hook up with your friends again, and you feel like you've got that community and that network of people that you didn't really when you were a backpacker.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of events like the Nomad Summit every year, even the Nomad Cruise, that's a reunion for a lot of digital nomads, especially people that met on, at the conferences or are on the trips. And I probably see the same people like a few times every year, even more than some of my friends that lived in the same state as me, just because we have so much free time, there's so much freedom. And we all love traveling. We all want to go to the same events, but also just to the same new hotspots.
Isn't it hilarious? I mean, I do feel like my digital nomads friends, some of them I spend more quality time with them than my good friends back in Seattle, because back in the United States, being busy is like a status symbol. Oh, I'm so busy. Oh, when can we meet? Okay, well, 4 weeks from today, we'll meet for lunch. And it's like, when you're on the road, you see somebody, you immediately have dinner, then you have dinner the next night, and then you go on a road trip 2 days later, and so you spend quality time. But as Michael says, that was the other thing we were worried about, that we would be isolated, we would feel lonely, we wouldn't be connected to a community. And really, we are far more socially active now. We feel far more connected by choice. I mean, by choice, it's far more connected than we ever did before, which is another really ironic thing.
And it's so interesting. Like pretty much every person we meet while traveling has an incredible story.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people that I met back home, and you talk to them for 5 minutes, and you realize like they've never done anything interesting in their life.
Well, the other thing is, digital nomad friends have warned me, when you go home, so much will have happened to you in the past 6 or 12 months, but people's lives are basically the same. Not that they haven't changed and not that interesting things haven't happened, but they haven't gone through the same personal change maybe that you have. And I've noticed that, and that's interesting. But that isn't true, as you said, of other digital nomads. Even so, we're in Tbilisi, Republic of Georgia right now. And the reason why we came here is we were meeting a couple of friends from last year. And it's been fascinating just spending time with them, and you sort of get a snapshot of people. We were with them a year ago. We've stayed in touch over the year, but now we see them again, and we've got a whole year's worth of change and experience to go over. And it's fun. One person is still in her 20s, and it's really fun to see what she's discovering about her direction in life and the things she's discovered about herself. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, I really love this community, and kind of on Michael's point about backpacking is I think it's a good first step to kind of sample the world, but I highly encourage everyone, even if you were just going to do a backpacking trip, to first give yourself some leeway and spend more time in places you like, or at least make a note and say, even though I can check off that I've been there, I haven't really been there. So you can always go back and say, okay, I'm going to spend 1 to 3 months here now.
But even after 1 to 3 months, Michael mentioned that 1 to 3 months. There's a term for what we do slow mad as opposed to nomad, that you stay in one country or one city anywhere from 1 to 3 months. But I love it because even if you stay 3 months in a place, there's still like 3 things that I really wanted to do that I never got to do. So I think exactly what you're saying. I think, well, we'll have to come back. We'll just have to come back sometime.
Well, you were talking about people making plans to make trips and going somewhere, and I don't know what percentage of your listeners are Americans, but I always feel really sad for Americans because as you travel and you see the rest of the world, and even outside the digital nomad community, Europeans, they get 4 or 6 weeks worth of vacation, so they can go and do that and see a place in a little bit more in depth. But as Americans, it feels like we've been sold a bill of goods that, your life has to be all about work. And being a digital nomad really helps break you out of that mindset and lets you see, other ways of living and how much of the world there is to get out there and see.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even like geographically in the US, it takes so long to get to other countries, especially to Asia, to Europe, where if we have a 2-week holiday, 4 of those days are just for travel. And then another 4 days is, being jet lagged. And, so we really have a week of traveling. And usually, we try to pack in as much as we can. And it sucks.
I think when people try to understand what we do, the peg that they have to hang it on is being on holiday or being on vacation. And it's not that. Because when you're on vacation, it is stressful. You're trying to see as much as possible. And it's also really expensive. And that isn't true of digital nomading. And I agree with you that people should maybe test it if they're unsure, give it a try for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But the big secret about all of this is if you're not paying rent or mortgage, that money that you would have been paying there is freed up. And what were the numbers? I think we spend with our mortgage in Seattle, our daily utilities and everything was something like $120 a day just to live in a house, which was not a big house. And I think about that now, and we, our rent is usually $15, maybe $20, maybe $30 a day. So even when you throw in food and travel and every other expense, we're still under what we were just paying to have a house over our heads. And when you have that kind of freedom, financial freedom, it gives you sort of a psychological freedom too. You're less stressed. You're not worried about money. You don't feel the urgency that you have to see absolutely everything. We're going to Rome later this year, and we're making the arrangements. And it's nice because it doesn't feel like we don't have to do the Vatican Museum. We don't have to do everything all at once. If we don't get to it, we'll see it later. Next time we're back in Rome, we'll see it next week, however long we want to stay. Everything's just much more casual and peaceful.
Well, the other thing, following up on that a digital nomad has let me discover is that once you get away from the must-see tourist sites of going to Paris and seeing the Eiffel Tower or going to London because you've just got those 2 weeks, and you allow yourself to explore and have flexibility, you start to discover things like a place in Matera or in southern Italy called Matera, where there's something called the Sassi, or you go to Bulgaria and discover Bansko, or here in Tbilisi, never would have dreamed of coming to Tbilisi in our old life, too far away, too difficult to get to. And now that we're here and it's this small size city that, you just don't think of as being a big tourist destination, there's all these amazing, wonderful things here that you get to discover. And that is a huge part of the digital nomad lifestyle.
Yeah, by far my favorite thing about this type of travel is I can go and do a tour, and then the very next day, instead of being exhausted and having to wake up again at 5 or 6 in the morning to do another tour, and that we're getting on a bus for 18 hours or on a flight or something. Now what I do is I'll have 1 day of touristy stuff, and then the very next day I'll sit in a coffee shop, I'll write a blog post, I'll edit my upload my photos and edit my videos, and I love it. It's like the best just kind of relaxation. And if I want to, then the next day or the day after, I can go do another touristy thing.
It is the way to travel. It absolutely is. And I mean, you can also, we were in Florence last year, and it was the sort of tourist crush, and it was just, everybody had been talking about we'd never been before, and everybody talked about how wonderful Florence is. But there's so many people there that it just made the whole experience exhausting and not that exciting. And so you can contrast these. Frankly, I don't think I'm ever going to go anywhere ever again during the tourist crush ever. I will avoid that for the rest of my life. But it's great that you can just sort of casually, you can travel off season, you can take a week off, as you say.
Well, following up on what you just said, Johnny, I remember when we used to have regular vacations, the 2-week period, you'd go and you'd try and cram as much in. And by the second week, the last couple days, you're like, okay, I guess it's time to go see Notre Dame. That's going to be great. And you go there and you're tired and you don't really appreciate it. You're on European cathedral overload and all the rest of it. And you don't get to take it in. Whereas you just said, you go into your tour, you see a couple things, you come back, you write about it, you think about it, you digest it, you remember it so much more and appreciate it so much more.
Yeah, and I think the thing that sucks the most about fast travel is it all blends together, especially when you do burnout. Yeah, you're seeing multiple cathedrals, multiple cities, multiple countries, and you're like, yeah, did I go to that restaurant was it Italy or France or Greece? And the worst thing that happens, and I've seen so many people devastated by this, as I'll be at a hostel somewhere, and somebody would have lost their camera or their phone broke or something, and they're like, oh my God, all my photos for the last 3 months are gone. And I can see why they're stressed, because it sucks. And in the hypological, mind and mind, I'm like, oh, did you back it up? Is it on the cloud? Is it on Google Photos? Didn't you upload them to Facebook? It's okay. And they're like, no, I haven't had time to even go through them. And the worst thing is, because it's all blur too, they don't even remember those, where they've been. So it's literally them going for 3-4 months and then going back to normal life. And when they hate their normal life and they have time again, they slowly go through their photos.
It is true, though. I have noticed more and more digital nomads, as people are getting into travel blogging, there is that whole, we need to stop for Instagram. And sometimes I think, and we do that too, and sometimes I think, is this content creation or is this travel? I think we could all stand to pause more and actually experience it in the moment. But, we're all creating content now, and it is a conundrum.
My kind of trick is I will spend 2 seconds to take that 1 or 2 photos, and then I put my phone away for the rest of the time. For dinner, if it's a nice meal, we had at Lolita the other night, I'll definitely take a photo because it's nice to remember that. But then I think if you spend more than a few seconds taking photos, food's getting cold. Yep. It's getting annoying for everyone.
We had burgers a couple weeks ago somewhere down here in the Vaque neighborhood, and we're eating our burgers, and I looked over, and these 2 other guys who probably are digital nomads had their meals out, and I swear to God, they spent 15 minutes positioning it and taking the perfect picture. I remember thinking, your food is going to be ice cold by the time you get to it. Okay, but there were 3 tables in that restaurant, and everybody, including us, was taking photographs of their food. It was, you're in Tbilisi when?
Well, so the funny thing is in the U.S., especially in high turnover places like New York, they say that the restaurants are now losing money because they're losing an entire seating per night.
As people take photos of their food?
Yeah, because, before the average kind of sit time was, let's say 40 minutes. They come in, they sit down, they order, they eat, they leave. Now, because of the photos,
that's hilarious.
It's added 15, 20 minutes.
Frankly, I think presentations are getting better too, though. It's like you no longer, it actually looks like the photo on what used to be the magazine. They want, because they know what everybody's up to. It's funny, the other thing about digital nomading, I think you also are far more likely to actually meet local people, to be integrated into the community, because you are integrated into the community and you buy fruit from the same person every day and you eat in the same cafe. And it's not just, you always sort of meet your tour guide, but they're paid to be charming and interested in your anecdotes. When you're a nomad, you are meeting other digital nomads, but you're also almost always, we make friends with local people too. And sometimes there are gay folks, and that's always interesting, getting insight into what it's like for other gay people. That's been an education in and of itself, hearing from their point of view. And it feels like you can't really get that experience when you travel in a traditional holiday kind of way. That's a break from your life, whereas this is our life, and our home literally is Tbilisi, Georgia for 3 months or however long we're going to be here. And it is our home. And I read somewhere that for a place or a person, you need to encounter them 3 times for them to be familiar. The first time, they're unfamiliar. The second time, it's like, oh, I recognize that person or this place. And then the third time, it actually feels familiar, and you have that feeling of affection and that feeling of connection. And it is remarkable. We keep saying this to each other. It's remarkable how quickly it feels once you sort of let go. And I think we have let go because we've sold our house and we don't have those ties anymore. So once you've let go, it becomes very easy to quickly become comfortable with other places and other people, which is fantastic.
Following up on something Brent said and changing the topic a little bit and bringing it back to why you had us on the show, being here in Tbilisi as a gay couple has been interesting and has been different from any other place we've been, because this is probably the least gay tolerant country that we've been to. They've tried to have pride here a couple of times, and it's either ended in violence or ended because of threats, including bombing threats. And people here are definitely worried about being out. They're not able to be out. We've been told they don't even want to be seen with Americans. Men don't want to be seen with other Americans because that can be seen as sort of strange, and it's hard for people to be out to their families. We're actually going to meet with Tbilisi Pride, which is the local gay rights group here, to talk with them about it. And we heard so many different things before we got here. We were cautious when we arrived. I had a cab driver quizzing me the other night, and I was by myself, and it was late at night, and he wasn't trying to figure out if I was gay or not. He was just asking me personal questions that, sometimes come up with your cab driver. And for the first time in forever, I, did not come out to him. I just sort of kept that information to myself. And that was a really weird feeling. And that made me very empathetic to what it's like to be a local Georgian LGBT person, where you literally have to worry about your physical safety. And we hope that we've decided we're not going to take any stupid chances, but we're going to be out as possible, and hope that in doing that, we can maybe move things a little bit better, get the locals who aren't gay seeing a gay couple and thinking, oh, okay, this isn't what I thought it was. They're not as weird as I imagined them to be.
I asked another guest a few episodes ago, Nathan, about being gay in Ukraine, but also here. And he said that, like, from his experience, as a tourist, it was actually much different than as a local. And, a big part of that is just, they're like, oh, well, they don't live here. That's a different culture. We're open to it. But then if you're a local Ukrainian guy or a local Georgian guy and you're gay, your life becomes very hard.
Yeah, we have a gay friend who has been dating in town, but he said it's impossible to go out on a date with a Georgian man because they don't, as Michael said, being seen with a Western person in a restaurant, if they were seen by friends or family, it would be suspicious. And so, but it's more than that. It almost feels like, and I don't mean to, I don't want to be judgy, but it does feel exactly what the United States felt like to me 30 years ago, that a level of consciousness, that sounds arrogant, I don't mean to sound like that, but it does feel like because of the oppression and because of family disapproval, there are these pressures, and it does feel like, so therefore things are repressed. But it does, because the world is so different, the reoccurring theme of this episode, and probably a lot of your episodes, is how all these technological changes are changing everything. And it does feel like these people have contact with us, they have contact with stuff online, and there is a consciousness. And it's funny, we've met 3 or 4 gay Georgian folks, and it is very strange. I guess it is a little different from my experience of myself 30 years ago, because there isn't quite the shame, because they are aware of the concept of being out, but at the same time they're aware of the practical realities of their life. Like, one guy said, my parents know that I'm gay, my sister knows, he lives with them, but I could never talk about it. So they've got like a fully formed identity as a gay person, out and proud, but not really, proud but not out, I guess I should say, which I think is interesting. And I think what that says to me is the pace of change here is going to be a lot faster than it was 30 years ago.
It's also really sobering knowing that, as a gay man, as a gay couple, we can up and go. We can take off whenever we're done, ready to go. And these folks can't. And as a digital nomad traveling the world, you see that in all kinds of ways. The lady we had dinner with the other night, she really dreamed of traveling, and yet she's Georgian, and so her opportunities aren't as great, to travel with her passport. And frankly, the finances are so much more difficult when you make a Georgian wage. And in Vietnam, there was a young lady we got to know, and she was really hopeful to get a visa to Sweden. And she was, waiting for weeks to find out if she was going to get approved. And as an American, it's really sobering and good for you to know that other people don't have all of those privileges that we do. Even as gay men who face discrimination, back in the day, we come here and we're just so incredibly privileged.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. And I feel the same for me too. Like, being able to leave a country if I don't feel welcome here is a great feeling. Having the financial means, but also to be able to work remotely and not have any physical attachments. It's a nice feeling.
It is. Oftentimes digital nomads will talk about, oh, it's such a cheap place to live, and we say this too. It's so much cheaper than Seattle, and on one hand, it is great when you have a Western income and you move to some of these poor countries. It is great for us, but then you think about it from the point of view of the local who's trying, maybe wants to leave, has ambitions to go to Europe. It's hard enough to leave your country anyway. I mean, it takes cojones of steel, and it takes ambition and drive and all of that. But then you think, well, you would also need 4 times the amount of money. How long would it take to save up that amount of money? And then there are, as Michael says, the passport issues. A lot of these countries, it's so easy for us as Americans. We can go almost anywhere. Can't go to Cuba and Iran. We can go everywhere else. Whereas, they can't. They can often not. They have to apply again and again and again and get rejected.
We just went to Armenia, and we had a driver who was taking us there, a local driver. And at one point, as we were getting ready to cross the Armenian border, he was holding my passport, and he was looking at it, and he was literally saying, "This is so beautiful." And he was sort of almost caressing it and looking at the the embossed emblem. And you could just see sort of the yearning on his face, and my realizing just what he couldn't do that I could do. It's sort of, I don't want to say the darker side of being a digital nomad, because I don't think it's dark. I think it's actually good. It's good for us to see this. It's good for us to go out and talk about it. And I do think it can be inspiring to meet, other people who are traveling and get them, thinking, well, maybe I can find a way to do this.
Yeah, if nothing else, we're helping them with their English. And it sounds silly, but that really is the key. Like, it's the key to, I don't want to say escape, like a life that you were born into, maybe that is with low wages or just without as much freedom. But it really, like, in Ukraine, but I would imagine pretty much anywhere else, the people that I met who spoke English, like, decently, always made more than double what other people made, sometimes triple. Even like the barber shops that, in Ukraine, if someone... I would go to places and, I have no hair, so I just go to the cheapest one I can find. If someone, is charging $2 or $3 for a haircut, they don't speak English. Like, I go in and I just gesture or speak terrible Russian. And then if I go somewhere and they speak English, I'm like, oh man, it's going to be $15. I know it.
It's another way in which this whole experience, I guess I was afraid of traveling to countries where I didn't speak the language. Oh, what would that be? It'll be confusing. It'll be awkward. And the reality, unfortunately, it's great for us, but it is unfortunately true that if you are an English speaker, you can travel almost anywhere in the world. And, usually everybody under 30 speaks English, or at least someone under 30 will speak English. And, if not, then you can just translate it on your phone. The other interesting thing, so we had this driver that we went into Armenia. There were 4 of us, Michael and myself and 2 of our friends. And he asked, we thought beforehand, are we going to tell him we're gay? We're going to tell him a couple? Well, let's just, I don't want to be stranded in Armenia. I don't want to be awkward for 3 days. Let's just not talk about it. But then once we were in the car, and ironically, he did immediately start asking us personal questions. This isn't the cab driver. This is our actual driver, the cab driver that Michael was talking about. This is our actual driver. And so we were sort of confronted, we were sort of vague. And it was weird to go back into the closet after all these years. But then as the trip went on, we're talking with our friends, and it was interesting, we're talking about our lives, talking having the comfort, we've been together more than 2 decades, just the familiarity. We were sleeping in the same bed in our different hotels as when we stopped for the night. And it was weird how often it sort of came up. And again, that's sort of a privilege. I don't really think about that. I'm just out and proud in most of the Western world. And here I became more conscious of it. And then it did become sort of awkward. And then we want to hire him again, and we never officially said. I mean, he was a sophisticated man. He was not a stupid man. He knew what was going on. But we sent him a message when all was said and done. We said, thank you. You were great. By the way, we'd like to hire you again. By the way, we are a same-sex couple. I hope that's okay, just so there's no confusion. And of course, he was fine with it, or at least he said he was. But it was interesting being pushed back into that, partly for personal reasons. Like, I didn't want it to be awkward. I also didn't want him to be, leave us stranded somewhere. I think that's a realistic concern. But it was an interesting experience.
This is Johnny FD, and this week I want to tell you about a really cool money-saving travel hack with Provo. As you guys are probably aware, I stay at a lot of Airbnbs, but the biggest problem with Airbnb is the refund policies and cancellation policies are terrible. The best thing about booking with hotels is how amazing their cancellation policies are. With most hotels, you can get back 100% of your money even if you cancel a day or two before. So Provo takes advantage of this really amazing cancellation policy by tracking the prices to see if they go down between the time you had booked your hotel and the time you're actually staying. All you have to do is forward any hotel confirmation that you have to nomad@provo.net. That's nomad@provo.net. And that's it. You don't have to make an account. You don't have to sign up or anything. They will let you know if that price ends up dropping before your stay, and they'll show you how much you can save. If you want, then you can create an account for them to automatically pull them out of your inbox, but you can just do it manually. You never even need to make an account if you don't want to. It's a great service. I've tried it myself. Just go through your Gmail or your email inbox right now and just start forwarding all your hotel confirmations that are upcoming to nomad@provo.net. So I guess I have a question on that point, because I have no personal experience with this. I wonder if it's kind of that middle zone between like everyone being okay with it and also like then everyone not being okay with it. Is it kind of at that point, kind of like that don't ask, don't tell point where like here in Georgia, yeah.
Well, I think there is really strong, vehement anti-gay prejudice. I think, as you said earlier, it is a little different for Westerners because, well, first of all, we're paying them, so it's like you're giving up financial interest by expressing your prejudice. But I mean, I just read a survey that 90% of Georgians say that homosexuality is never acceptable. And I think in the United States now it's down to like 35% say that. So there it is. I think these are real concerns. On the other hand, we're in the city, we're dealing with people who speak English, as you said, which I think is a really big indicator of something. And I do think there are exceptions made for Westerners in general.
Well, I think the Western exception is huge, and that goes on in almost everything. I mean, we're sort of exotic creatures when we show up. I mean, the gay thing aside, I have never been looked at as much as I have been here in Georgia.
Well, you do look like a young George Clooney.
Really? I've heard that somewhere. I'm not sure where. No, I mean, there's something about the clothes we wear, the way we walk, that we just stand out, and we can be this sort of intense focus. And I think here in Georgia, it's just more acceptable to openly look at people. But going back to the don't ask, don't tell part, no, I don't think Georgia has moved into the don't ask, don't tell part. Maybe more here in Tbilisi, that's the case. But it definitely talking with some of the locals and reading online and the violent reaction. I mean, there are gay bashings that are going on.
Well, and the other thing that I think maybe a straight person wouldn't consider, when something does go wrong, let's say we are beat up. Somebody thinks we're a couple because we're two middle-aged men. We're relatively well-groomed. We're, people, it's not crazy to think we're a couple. So we're beat up. If something goes wrong, I want the authorities to take my side. Yeah. I don't want them to take the side of the gay basher. Or if we're in an accident and Michael is in the hospital and I want to see him, I want the authorities to take my side and recognize the fact that, I'm his husband and I want to see him. And I think that is a real risk in countries like this, that the authorities, if the worst does happen, which it does happen from time to time, you want the authorities on your side, which it would be in any European country. It would be in most of the United States right now. Yeah. But I don't think it would be in most of Georgia.
It definitely should be. I mean, there's no, I think the logical thing is, if someone attacks someone else, regardless of why they attacked them, they attacked them, and that's it. And I can see that, especially maybe outside of the city, that it's not acceptable right now. And actually, even with, I think their culture is so conservative, even with just normal like heterosexual dating. Like I remember, so in my Tbilisi blog post, I had a short section about dating in Georgia and Tbilisi, and I wrote, like the girls are very conservative, and then I had a Georgian guy comment on it on one of the local Facebook groups, and he writes this like 5-page paragraph, and it really highlighted saying like they are very protective of traditional family values in a sense, not like just in the US, like to like a religious extreme here.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I'm sure you've had the same conversation, but a lot of our friends have, they experience daily sort of sexual harassment. And it's a little bit like the consciousness we're talking about, the sort of the gay consciousness. That's not really, if you were to say rape culture, I think you would get a blank expression. I mean, that our consciousness has not been raised here in Georgia. And so there's not even really a peg to hang it on. It's just what men do to women. Men leer at women, and that's okay. And maybe it's not okay if he grabs her ass. Maybe it's okay if he grabs her ass, she can slap him. Maybe that's part of the code. But the code is not, no, it is never okay in any circumstance for a man to touch a woman unsolicited. The whole notion of consent, that's evolving here. That's still embryonic here.
And I want to feel optimistic about Georgia because seeing the economic changes and how the city of Tbilisi has changed so much, it's important for us as Westerners and people who come from more stable countries to remember this is a country that was under the yoke of the Soviet Union for a long time, and then the Iron Curtain came down. The Iron Curtain came down, and they struggled economically, and they've had a civil war, and they had to fight with Russia. I mean, this is a country that in many profound ways has been fighting for its very survival for a long time. And when that happens, some of these other issues end up, coming along more slowly. So I do think walking around Tbilisi, especially in the Vake and Vera neighborhoods, you do feel like you're in a Western country. And I really do think, having gotten to know some of the Georgians, I do think they will come along to those points of view. I do think they will evolve on those things.
But it is interesting. I mean, taking a step back, looking at a slightly bigger picture, we're visitors. This is not it is I said it was our home earlier, but it is not our country. It's not our true home. And so you have to be respectful. So sort of the existential question of how do you maintain your own identity and keep your dignity and not compromise your own values while at the same time being respectful of local cultures and local traditions. Because that's not, my job is not to come in and lecture people and tell them, oh, you must conform to my values. My job is to be a guest here and be respectful of those values, but at the same time hold on to my own values. And so it's sort of, again, when I said being a digital nomad forces you to be intentional. When you buy something, you have to give something else up. Well, that's a good metaphor for all of this, that you sort of have to give up part of your own identity a little bit. It doesn't feel like a compromise because you are also getting something in return, which is an honest cultural exchange and an exchange of identity. And it's, again, more than anything, it makes you aware of who you are and what is important to you and the things that you won't compromise on and the things that you realize, oh, well, that wasn't important at all. That I can totally let go. And you sort of do that from top to bottom in your life. What you carry, what you believe, what you eat, what you watch, what's important, what shows are important on TV, which, you give up in order to go out with friends. And so your life from top to bottom becomes more intentional and more conscious. And I just think that's awesome.
Yeah, I really like it. And actually what you had mentioned about, like earlier, about every time you buy something, you have to give something up. Mm-hmm. I love these constraints. I think by not having constraints in your life, that's when you lead to like become a hoarder.
Yeah, right.
Like, a hoarder technically has more stuff than all of us, right? Combined probably. So you would think that having more stuff would make you more happy. But that's the perfect example of having more is not better.
I think it helps. Michael said earlier that we're in our 50s. Thanks a lot, Michael. Michael's in his 50s. I'm in my mid-40s. And I think it helps that I have often identified with millennial values all of my life. And it helps because, that's the whole millennial thing, that experiences are worth way more than things. And I've thought that my whole life. I guess it's been in the back of my mind my whole life. But now it is just, for me personally, maybe not for everybody, but for me personally, experiences are worth so much more than things. And if something is important, you make that a priority, then that's the thing that you're willing to carry, and it becomes intentional. But for the most part, there's just not that much. I would rather have experiences and relationships and memories than any particular thing we gave up.
Well, going back to the whole intentional aspect, we were never particularly materialistic people living in Seattle. I mean, I've never cared that much about clothes. We've never owned a new car in our life. Our furniture wasn't particularly expensive. And yet when we decided to do this and we started downsizing, I was stunned by the amount of crap that we'd accumulated. I mean, I was just blown away by it. And we gave away some of the better stuff to people, but we had to have like the trash people come twice to haul away all the stuff that we didn't want. And years ago, there was one point where we were in between houses and we had to put our stuff in storage. And this sort of got us in the mindset for becoming a digital nomad. We put all our stuff in storage. We lived in a friend's basement for a year. And then our new house was finally ready. We went and got our stuff and we opened up the storage locker and we were like,
I don't want any of this stuff, right?
Before we even got to that point, it was like, what the hell is in here? What is it that we put in here a year ago? And you open it up and it's like, it's just sort of astounding. And so not having that stuff weighing you down, both literally and metaphorically, is huge. I mean, I love that.
Okay, but at the same time, we had an awesome house that we loved, and we had a cute little Volkswagen Beetle that we loved. And I mean, it's true, we didn't...
It's the only car we've loved.
Well, I mean, it's true, I guess you could say we weren't materialistic, but there were things, I mean, you open one door, you have to close another door. And it was, so we gave up that awesome ecological, greenhouse that was part of a, cool little development in the middle of Seattle. We gave that up, but now we get to stay in a different city, in a different place every 1 to 3 months. And, we can live on a cruise ship for 2 months out of the year.
What amazes me, though, is that I almost never think of those things we gave up. It rarely crosses my mind unless we're talking to other people about something. I mean, I just don't think about it because honestly, I'm usually thinking about the things we're going to be doing while we're here in Tbilisi. And then it's like, oh, we're off to Rome. And then we're going to be on a cruise ship. And then we're going to be in Seattle for a month visiting our friends and family. And oh, maybe we'll go to Mexico for next year. So,
and yet it doesn't feel, I mean, just hearing you say that, it makes it sound hectic, but it's not hectic because...
Or exotic.
Well, it is exotic. Well, it's funny. So I'm a writer. I'm a novelist and a screenwriter, and I'm in preparation for a book coming out later this year, and so I'm doing like the media materials, and I did a little pitch sheet on 5 interesting things about Brent Hardinger, that would be media angles, and I looked at it and I was done, and none of them were about being a digital nomad, and it's like, oh, this should be a list of 6 things. That's like one of the most interesting things about me. But what I thought was interesting is it didn't even occur to me that is any way unusual, because this is the fabric of my life, that everybody that I spend time around is either a digital nomad or is a local in some so-called exotic country. But it doesn't feel strange or weird or exotic. And it's only been 3 years since we made this decision. And it's fresh enough that I remember what I was thinking. And I mean, when we decided to do this, we had never even heard the term digital nomad. And it was like we were in preparation and we saw that article in the New York Times, and Michael said, digital nomad, I think that's what we're going to be.
What was the article?
There was an article about digital nomads in 2017. That was the one before the one about Rome, right? It was just about the phenomena of being a digital nomad. But the fact is, the term hasn't been around. I mean, I guess it's been around, but it hasn't been popularized really. I mean, co-living, that wasn't a thing 4 years ago. And so I am sort of pleased with myself. I think back, well, we just sort of made this massive leap, not really even knowing where we were going to live, how, what was going to be like. We just sort of did it. But at the same time, that part was a little mysterious and stressful. So we can say to myself of 3 years ago, we can say it isn't mysterious and it isn't stressful. It is. There are already other people doing it, and it's not the thing you're afraid of at all. It's this awesome other thing that we've been talking about all.
It's so funny. If you had told the Brent and Michael of 2017 that you're going to go live in a small mountain town in Bulgaria and you're going to love it, and then, a year later then you're going to go live in Tbilisi, Georgia, 100 kilometers south of the Russian border, we would have been, our brains might have short-circuited at that point. And yet now it's like, yeah, Ukraine, sure, why not? Oh, let's go check out Morocco. It starts to feel so normal and easy and comfortable. And I imagine you have felt that way for years and years and years. But it's amazing how quickly it comes and what a wonderful feeling it is.
When we were in Armenia last weekend, we were very near the Iranian border, and our driver said, "You want to go across?" And we're all like, "Yeah, why don't we didn't have the visa, but we're all like, yeah, if we'd had the visa, sure, let's go across, let's go to Iran." And I mean, that, like Michael said, 3 years ago, I can't admit, like I said, I'm not a risk taker. I'm a cautious person, but I haven't changed. I'm still not a risk taker, and I'm still a cautious person. What has changed is now I know that you can do so much of this without taking, serious risks with life. And I feel safer in Tbilisi, which is like literally the safest city in Europe. But I feel safer in Europe than I do in the United States, if only for the lack of guns. And I don't, pickpocketing, that's only an issue in tourist areas. I mean, you need to be vigilant. But I very, very, very rarely feel unsafe.
I think the most unsafe I felt in the past year was when we were in Switzerland, and we did this hike up to a glacier, and we wound up climbing up the steepest trail I've ever been on, where you literally looked several hundred meters down on the people below you, and one misstep and you're toast. Other than that,
it's the typical thing, Switzerland, So we're climbing up this mountain, and I'm thinking, gosh, this is a really steep climb. And it's one of those hikes with the chains pound into the rocks, and so you're vertically climbing, and I'm thinking, gosh, do we want to do this? And at one point you're on sort of a knife's ridge. I'm thinking, oh wow, I guess this is okay. And then we get up to the top, and there's like families with toddlers and a woman and a walker. The Swiss don't care. They're like, and there's a restaurant, and it was a little humiliating because the Swiss, this was like nothing for them. This climb was ridiculous. I guess we also, we were in Bulgaria, and our apartment caught on fire, which was upsetting. But really the annoying part was there were no smoke detectors or fire extinguishers, and I didn't happen to know the Bulgarian word for help, and I've already forgotten it again. Our phone, our Wi-Fi, we didn't have coverage at that moment in time. So finally, what did we do? We texted our landlord.
I used Facebook Messenger to get in touch with our landlord and say, would you please call the fire department? Our apartment's on fire. And Brent's outside running around the courtyard going, fire, fire. And the few Bulgarians around are just sort of looking at him like he's a bit of a crazy person and walking by. Fortunately, Bulgarian buildings are mostly built out of concrete, so the fire didn't spread very far.
On our flight over to Europe this time, somebody was recharging a battery in first class, and one of the seats caught on fire. And so we had to make an emergency landing. That's, as Gandalf says to Bilbo, it's dangerous business stepping outside your door, But, that could happen. I feel like we were in more danger driving back and forth on the freeways in Seattle. We had far more close calls.
That being said, crossing a Tbilisi street is a bit of taking your life in your hands because they do not yield for pedestrians here.
Yeah, so I actually learned the trick here. So at the beginning,
do tell.
So I had to cross the street every single day to get to my gym. And I thought, man, this is gonna be the life. Like, this is gonna be the death of me. And there seemed like there's zero crosswalks.
Like a crosswalk matters.
Yeah. Well, finally, actually, after a week, I realized there was a crosswalk. It just was very unmarked, but it was 2 blocks away, so it wasn't super convenient. But I did start changing my route so I can use it. But really, what it is you walk across, you make eye contact.
I was just gonna say that's
and you put your hand out. And they will stop, but it is a bit scary. And it's not my favorite thing about Tbilisi. I think that's something that they need to change. Especially what's really insane is the most touristy areas, Rusta Valley and the old city. Those 2 areas need crosswalks because that's where tourists are, and those are the 2 places that have none.
That's true. But it's true that every country and every city has a slightly different code of traffic ethics, and it is a little bewildering. You have to, and it's not like there's a rule. It's not like there's a guidebook. You just sort of, when we were in Vietnam, you were actually more unsafe if you hesitate, because the only way the system works is everybody is constantly moving, but everybody at the same time is aware of everybody else. So you go out into traffic, whether you're on a scooter or a bike or on foot, you step out into traffic and you just sort of assume they will stop, and they will stop, at least presumably they will stop. But I couldn't quite make that mental leap. They all believed they would stop, and that's the cultural mores. but I don't know they're going to stop. So I would keep screwing everything up because I'm not willing to make that, it's my life. I've only got one life.
I feel like here in Tbilisi, I've got an American sense of entitlement when it comes to crossing the street. I'm the pedestrian. I'm a 6'1" guy. I'm going out in traffic and they're going to stop. And that's almost always been the case. And it's been interesting because I will be crossing and the traffic will be stopping. And a couple times I've glanced behind me and I've seen like an older Georgian woman or just a local, and they're like still not crossing because they're just worried about what those cars are going to do. Fast and Furious happens to be filming here right now. Did you know that? Somebody sent me a video of one of the stunts they were doing, and I looked at it and I said, yeah, that's just called normally crossing the street here in Tbilisi. That's nothing special.
Yeah, actually someone made that joke about that too, saying like, why do they spend all this money closing off the streets? They could have just filmed any random 3 p.m. Oh, I love it. So, well, you briefly mentioned that you're both writers. Is that how you're supporting yourself while living abroad? Can you tell me about that?
Yes. I've been a writer of fiction for more than 15 years. I write young adult novels, and I also write screenplays. It's kind of fun because I'm a digital nomad. I was able to go to the filming of my last film project, which is called Project Payday, which is sort of a teenage caper movie that'll be out next year in Philadelphia. So we were there in the month of June, and I don't know that they wanted me there. They did. They were very, very generous and kind. But usually, the screenwriter's not necessarily on set. But because I can live anywhere, I could live there. I sort of got that experience, and Hollywood is not big on paying for writers to come and be on set. But anyway, so I was able to be there, and that was really exciting. And I mean, it is true. It is also true that I sort of feel like everywhere we go, I have more things to write about. I wrote you stay in a lot of Airbnbs and you travel a lot, and I'm sort of fascinated by the concept of everyone you meet, all I know about this person is what they're presenting to me. So they could be a mass murderer. They could have just killed somebody 5 minutes ago. But what they're telling me is, I'm just on vacation or whatever. So I wrote a sort of claustrophobic thriller about 3 characters in an Airbnb, and they don't know each other's past and what's really going on. And I wrote a screenplay, sort of a romantic comedy called Nomads, about digital nomads, which is sort of four weddings and a funeral crossed with Eat, Pray, Love, where 2 characters are traveling the world and their paths keep crossing, but circumstances keep them apart as they are digital nomads. And so it is definitely becoming fodder for my writing. And the irony is I feel like I get more work done because I want to work so that I can then play, and I'm working often in a co-working space, and it's silly, but just the presence of other people makes me less likely to surf and waste time. I don't know. I am getting more done. I feel like I'm writing more things based on my travel. So it was great for my writing too.
I could definitely see that. And I remember I wanted to do stand-up comedy as a kind of just a life kind of just bucket list item. And they're like, okay, can you go on tonight? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I remember it was so easy just thinking about all these experiences I've had. And I'm thinking in every city I go to, there's a list of things I find just different or weird or strange, especially compared to American culture. And I'm like, if I actually took the time to write these things down, I can go back to the US and have an hour-long comedy special just on the weird quirks of every country.
Absolutely. Over the course of my writing career, I've done pretty much everything under the sun. I've been an editor. I've been a novelist. Brent and I co-founded a gay entertainment website with some friends, and I was editor of that, and we sold it to MTV Viacom, and I worked for them for a number of years. I've written online educational curriculum. But when we've been on the road, when we started this, we set up a website, Brent and Michael Are Going Places, just sort of for ourselves to chronicle what we're doing and keep track of it. But over the course of the past 2 years, I've become more drawn towards writing about that. And Brent and I, we pretty much knew right away we were eventually going to write a memoir about what we were doing and about our life together. And these past couple of weeks, I've actually turned more focusing towards that and working on that and building that up. And honestly, inspired by what you have done with your blogging and how you've made money, that will never be our main source of income. But it's sort of just been sitting there untapped. And so we're working on building that up and using that as a platform for our memoir when it comes time to sell that. And there's just so many, as Brent just said, there's just so many interesting things about this life to write about that it's an endless source of inspiration.
There's a line in one of my screenplays about travel that everybody on the road is either running away from something or searching for something or maybe both. And I think that's really true. I mean, you don't leave home unless you're dissatisfied. You've got a reason. If you're content, you're going to stay where you are. So there's something about, you don't quite fit in. It doesn't feel right. That's going to propel you out the door and on the road. And we're sort of fascinated by that. And when we did start this, we thought, yeah, eventually we will write a memoir. We'll write about this experience. And it was just a couple of months ago when our plane caught on fire. In fact, because it seemed like such a good opening for the book, we decided, it's finally time to write the story. But what's interesting is it's exactly what you said earlier, that our story isn't just the story of when we left the house 2 years ago. It's everything that led up to it and why we were so frustrated with our careers, why we were frustrated with our lives, and what happened, Michael's childhood, my childhood. My mother had this idea that the world was a scary place. She was a fearful, anxious person, and she communicated to me, be afraid of the world, and that I think I tried to look beyond that, but it shaped my worldview. And so really the story of our travels is a story of our lives and how we met and why we were together and why we left, and then the ending, which is, this is what we were meant to be doing. This is so the right thing for us. And when we sort of put that all together, we realized, okay, now it's finally time to write the memoir.
I love it. And I love being part of your journey.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's fun. I've actually been telling myself, so I wrote a travel guide to Thailand called 12 Weeks in Thailand, The Good Life on the Cheap. And reading back on it, well, actually all the comments said, this isn't a travel guide, this is like a memoir of this 20-something-year-old guy going to Thailand. And I realized, yeah, it completely is. I was never I wasn't just, stating the facts of like, this is, accommodation, how much it costs. And I think that all of us, especially the ones that travel and have been through a lot, have had unique circumstances, we have something to share, and I guess depending on how good of a writer you are and how interesting the story is, if other people would actually read it or pay money for it. But I do think that pretty much every single person I've met on this journey could write a book if they wanted to, and probably should, even if it's just for themselves.
Yeah, it's funny. We've been reading a lot of travel memoirs, and they all have the same formula, which is somebody's desperately unhappy, they make an abrupt break, and then they find themselves. But I mean, that's what travel is. That's literally what travel is.
Yeah, and the thing about, at least living in Thailand, it's probably the same everywhere in the world, is most expats, I don't want to say expats, but most people who are living in another country, especially one that is completely foreign to their own, as you mentioned, we're hiding, we're running from something that we didn't like back home. Yep. Or maybe we're chasing something else. Mm-hmm. And I think it's changing now, where you have more kind of just normal people that were actually pretty happy back home, and they're just like, oh well, I was happy, I was had money, and I was like, I had the freedom to do this, so now I'm doing this. So I think it is changing.
As it's more of an option, as it becomes easier. I mean, it just is. I hate to take away from our achievements, but it is so much easier.
Yeah, it really, really is. And it's also more socially acceptable now. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, if someone lived in Thailand, you're like, why? Like, this guy must be a weird guy. Why is he living in Thailand?
Well, here's the question for you. So we were debating this on our trip to Armenia, the four of us. It's like, do you think people are the same all over, or do you think people are different? You know what I mean? As you meet the locals, is everybody loves their kids, or is it, no, there really are fundamental differences?
I think it's a bit of both. I think in the core, people are very similar, right? Yeah. Like we want food, shelter, family. Yeah. But I also do think that in different, in every country, they're distinctly different. Yep. It's nature versus nurture. I think it's half-half. I really do. I don't think it's just because the culture is different, the religion is different, or the language is different. I do think it's something in people's blood and DNA, how they grew up, maybe their food or their water or their environment. But culture and especially religion does make a huge impact. Yeah.
Because one of us is obsessed with amusement parks, I'll leave it unsaid which one of us it is. We visited a number of amusement parks, and just last night we were up at Matsminda Park here in Tbilisi. And what always strikes me in those places is how much the same people are. You see parents walking around with their kids, wanting some fun entertainment, buying them a treat, laughing, and just having a good time. And I think, as you said, I think it's some of both, but I do think at the core, we're a lot the same. We want to be happy. We want our kids to have a little bit better opportunity than we did. We don't want to have to worry about keeping a roof overhead or the food coming in or, whether the big country next door is going to come storming down at some point.
But both the similarities and the differences are what make it interesting. Finding out, oh my gosh, this person is so like me in ways that are fundamental, even superficially we're so different. At the same time, you're sort of fascinated by, oh my God, this culture is so different. That's the way they look at it, and you sort of feel now in defense of amusement parks.
Now you know who likes them.
I love amusement parks, but I'm cheap and I hate people. So you go to Vietnam, for example, and there are these fantastic, modern, cool amusement parks that are empty, at least when we were there, and that cost $5 to $10 by Western standards, and so that's pretty awesome. That's paradise for me.
Okay, well, the one place in Vietnam that's not super crowded.
Yeah, right.
Oh, it was weird. It's an amusement park south of Hoi An, and we didn't know what to expect when we went there. It's part amusement park, it's part water park, and there's a cultural center aspect to it. And I swear, when we got there were 100 people in the whole park. Some of the water rides, we'd walk up to them, the attendant would run over, he'd turn on the water so that the slide would get wet enough that we could go down it. And it was very surreal.
But there were a bunch of amusement parks. There was the Bonai Hills, and there was the park downtown.
Yeah, Bonai Hills had a fair few people, though.
Yeah, and every single street is an amusement park, basically.
Yes, well, yes.
Every taxi ride is a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, we were driving home from an amusement park once, and they were caught in like a monsoon, and so the water is like 6 inches deep. And there's a downed power line, across the road. There's a tree and also a downed power line. And I'm thinking the cab driver is going to turn around. Instead, he just hops out of the car, ankle deep in the water, tosses the power line. I mean, I didn't know, presumably it wasn't live, but I'm like, are you kidding? And then we drive through the foliage of the tree, toss the power line to one side, and it's like they are more comfortable. They're a lot more comfortable with risk. And sadly, I do think life is also a little cheaper in some of these heavily populated, poorer countries. And on one hand, I get frustrated by the litigious nature of the United States, that we are helicopter parents and, everybody's sued and play areas need to be perfectly safe, whereas you see play areas in, the Ukraine or Bulgaria and you're like, oh my God. Yeah, but on the other hand, kids learn, they fall, they break their arm and they learn not to do that again. It feels like, so I don't, again, I don't want to generally be judgy because this is not my culture. But I guess I can have a personal opinion. And sometimes I do think, you see the family of 6 on a scooter in Thailand.
Yeah.
2 toddlers, in one arm and no helmets. And it's like, is that really the best possible choice you could be making?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily being judgy to look at Thailand, which is a perfect example. You literally do see a family of 6. I just read an article in the New York Times that Thailand has got the second highest death rate on the road in the world. And that's it's sad to see that and to know that those people are suffering in a way they, hopefully in a few years they won't be as they modernize those things.
And I just want to say to your digital nomad listeners, so when we were in Thailand, we didn't get a scooter. We were like the only of our friends. We were just doing the tuk-tuk thing, and we were hiking, and we did a little bit of biking, and people thought we were crazy. We got nothing but grief from our digital nomad friends, and they'd say, oh, you guys are so, you gotta live a little. You gotta get a scooter. And I swear to God, literally every friend that we know has been in a scooter accident, some of whom very seriously. And so all I'm saying is think twice about those scooters.
Yeah, that's a really hard one because part of me, one of my favorite things about Thailand is the freedom of being able to ride a scooter. Yeah. It's the most convenient thing in the world. You bypass all the traffic. You can literally park anywhere. You can literally park at the front door of the restaurant, in the restaurant if you really wanted to.
But 3 of our friends who were with us in Thailand since we were there and when we were there, February, March, have been in accidents.
Yeah.
It's a thing.
So I agree. It's 100% a reality that it is unsafe and people get in an accident and it's a real thing. And the worst thing about it is people kind of brush it under the rug because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit to it. I'm kind of in the middle where what I do is I say, you know what, I don't want to completely give up the freedom, the convenience of it because I do like it. But at the same time, I'm not going to put myself in adverse risk for no reason. So what I do is I have a scooter, but I only ride it within Neiman, and within kind of the old city. So I'm never going more than 20 miles an hour. I'll always wear some kind of helmet, even though it's not like a crazy full face helmet. I have something to protect my head, and for me, I'm like, you know what? That is the extent of safety I'm willing to go. I'm not going to wear a heavy, hot motorcycle jacket. I know I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to wear a heavy, full face, hot helmet either. But what I can do is not ride on freeways and highways. What I can do, I'm not going to drive drunk. I'm not going to drive stupid. And I'm going to, make sure I have the proper training before I do it. And I think that's the problem is people, because everyone else makes it seem so easy, people assume that there's no risk, because all these other backpackers are doing it without any training.
Well, and when we had dinner last week, you talked about your background in scuba diving, and we just had a conversation with another friend. It's like you can scuba dive in Thailand. They give you 15 minutes training, and I took a 2-month course, and I mean, it is true. I don't like thinking that when you give people freedom, they're going to screw it up, but there's truth to that. We talked about this too. And it does feel like, you need to, I mean, this comes naturally to me because I'm the neurotic, nervous one, but that's okay. I mean, I think, you need to be cautious. You need to think about the choices you make.
Well, I just feel like what you said, that you have to get the training and do it. And as you said, people don't talk about it. When you get to Thailand, people will say, oh yeah, just go down here and get a scooter. And we had friends who literally say, I've never been on a scooter before, but sure, I'll do it. And most of the time they were fine, but oftentimes they weren't, and they would get in scrapes. And
every friend has been in an accident.
Yeah, it's we all have to decide for ourselves. Brent and I have chosen not to ride scooters in Thailand.
Yeah, and I think knowing that there are ways to go around without it. You can live in the Neiman area, or you can live in a very walkable area. You can take taxis everywhere and not cheap out on it and say, that's just part of the cost. I'm going to take the taxi. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely possible. I do miss the scooter days. It's actually getting harder. They're cracking down on it more. They're checking more licenses and taking more bribes. So unfortunately, I guess maybe good for Brent, but the scooter culture is actually going to be ending soon in Thailand. So that is one chapter that's going to kind of close.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting having you two on. I think this has been a really fun episode.
Thanks for us too. We've enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, good. How can people find you?
We are all over social media. Our website is brentandmichaelaregoingplaces.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Brent and Michael are going places. Very simple. We're on Twitter at Brent and Michael. Just Brent and Michael. Twitter, we're just at Brent and Michael. We write a bi-weekly column for LGBTQ Nation, so feel free to read us there. We love hearing from people, so contact us anytime. Happy to answer any questions, especially for the LGBT folks out there who are wondering about this and thinking about doing it. We're happy to share our experiences.
Yeah, very cool. So thank you so much, Michael and Brent.
Thank you, Johnny.
See you guys. Thank you for listening to the Travel Like a Boss podcast. If you want to hear more, including the bonus, How to Choose the Perfect Niche episode, join our mailing list at travellikeabosspodcast.com. See you next week, and remember, if you want to travel like a boss, you need to be your own boss. So start your online business today and start living the lifestyle you've always dreamed of.